Hello, this is Helen Mottee, and I want to welcome you to For Eternity.
I put my heart in your hands and you taught me to fly.
Hebrews 13 verses 1 to 3 exhorts us to let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. In this edition of For Eternity, we are going to Eritrea, a country I had not even been aware of until recent years. Eritrea is located in the Horn of Africa, bordered by Sudan in the west, Ethiopia in the south, and Djibouti in the southeast. Eritrea also shares maritime borders with Yemen and Saudi Arabia. The capital is Asmara, and the name Eritrea comes from the Latin name for the Red Sea. Before we turn our spotlight on this country, which is number 9 on Open Doors 2015 World Watch List, I'd like to read you this testimony from North Korea. The year is 2001. We read, Kim had come home unable to speak. His mother could tell he was in shock and sat with him, soothing him and trying to find out what had happened. Finally, he began to open up to her. I was with one of my best friends today when 2 police officers approached us. They grabbed my friend and accused him of being a Christian. One of the officers knocked him to the ground while the other took out his gun. My friend didn't get angry or curse anyone. He didn't even try to defend himself. Even as the gun was pointed directly at him, his face remained peaceful. He looked straight into my eyes, and without speaking a word, I knew exactly what he was saying. He wanted me to believe the same thing he did. And then he just said, "Bless them." He was executed right in front of me because he was a Christian. I do not even know what a Christian is. I don't understand any of this. Kim's mother held his head in her hands. There were tears in her eyes. Now it was she who was in shock. She then told him simply, "I understand." How could you possibly understand why they would kill my friend? She slowly began to tell her son about her Lord Jesus Christ, how he had miraculously been born of a virgin and crucified on a cross to save all those who would believe in him. As she continued sharing with her eldest son, she began to sob. Now it was she who couldn't go on. She felt the pain of never daring to tell her son about Jesus Christ, lest his fate would be like that of his friend. She also felt the overwhelming joy of knowing that God had not forgotten her son, but allowed someone else to bring him the gospel. Finally, she told him, God allowed you to witness the martyrdom of one of his brave children. As those bullets hit his heart, a seed of hope was planted in yours. The son prayed that night and received Jesus Christ into his life. He was filled with joy as he embraced his mother and thanked her for telling him the truth. But suddenly he began to weep again and appeared distraught. Confused, the mother asked, "Now what's wrong?" "My brothers," Kim cried. "They do not know Jesus. We must tell them." His 3 brothers soon came home and discovered their older brother and mother crying together. Their first thought was that something terrible had happened to their father, and they quickly knelt down beside their mother asking what was wrong. With unnatural boldness, the eldest son stood up and responded, "You should also receive Jesus Christ." Before the evening had passed, all 3 had done exactly that. The mother was filled with joy. Although she had never dared to speak to her children about her Christian faith, she had diligently prayed for them every day. Now that her children had accepted Jesus, she began cautiously looking for a Bible so they could learn more of God's Word. But she could not find any. Eventually, her older son secretly crossed the Yalu River into China in search of Bibles. You can imagine the look on his face when he finally came across a miniature Bible in the Korean language. He pleaded with the Christians in China, asking how he could obtain some of these Bibles. Regrettably, no more were available. Refusing to admit defeat, he told the Christians the dramatic story of how he had witnessed his friend's death and how he and his brothers had learned of Jesus Christ. Before departing for North Korea, he said, "I am in need of 5,000 of these Bibles to share with my family and others in North Korea. I will be back in 1 month to pick them up." Hearing of the request, some Christian workers hurriedly printed 5,000 copies of the miniature Korean Bibles. Over the next year or so, Kim returned on several occasions to smuggle the Bibles back across the border. All 4 of these brothers are now actively sharing their faith, knowing firsthand the consequences if they are discovered. Since their last pickup of these Bibles some months ago, no one has heard further news of them.
Yet I am still with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel. And after you will take me into glory. Into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? Whom have I in heaven but you? And the earth has nothing that I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion. Heaven but you. Whom have I in heaven but you? And the earth has nothing that I desire besides you. Those who live without you surely die. Those who live without you surely die. For me, it is good, good to be near God. I have made besides you.
Ecumenical News webpage posted this article in May 2013. We read, "A Christian leader in Eritrea says that religious persecution in the northeast African country is at its highest level ever and getting worse. World Watch Monitor, the news outlet of Open Doors, a Christian charity, reports. It indicated that the leader's name would not be used because of security reasons. Up to 3,000 Christians are imprisoned because of their faith in Eritrea. Voice of the Martyrs say many prisoners are held in metal shipping containers without ventilation or toilet facilities. Eritrea allowed religious freedom until 2002, when the government announced it would only recognise Sunni Islam, the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church of Eritrea, and the Lutheran-affiliated Evangelical Church of Eritrea," said Voice of the Martyrs. Since then, it says the Eritrean government has tortured and jailed numerous Eritreans for political and religious reasons. As a result, Eritrea has been called the North Korea of Africa. Salem Kadani, an Eritrean expatriate and director of Release Eritrea, a UK-based human rights organisation, said that while persecution is not limited to Christians, it is the underground church which is suffering the most. "Any religion that is not willing to come under the control of the government is being persecuted," she said. "It's not just confined to Christians. But in terms of being completely banned, it's the minority churches that have suffered the most. The Pentecostal Church, the Evangelical Church, they are the ones who have been stigmatized and been accused of all sorts of things by their communities and other faith groups." A report by International Christian Concern, ICC, indicated that Christians who try to flee have been kidnapped by human traffickers. The ICC report said that these vulnerable Christians are attacked and kidnapped from refugee camps, then transported to the Sinai Desert, where they are sold like commodities. The victims are tortured and their agony relayed by phone to families back in Eritrea or diaspora groups in order to elicit ransom. If the ransom is not paid, the victims are tortured to death, including by removing saleable organs, said ICC. Even if the ransoms are paid, human traffickers may sell their victims to other criminal groups. Amnesty International has appealed to Egypt and Sudan to stop the kidnappings of refugees in Sudan and their transport to Egypt. In addition, Eritrean opposition groups are demanding increased security at the camps. The chairman of the Ethiopia-based Eritrean Democratic Alliance, Teweldi Gebrselassie, said on the ICC website that human trafficking is being carried out by a highly organised network. He said it is a highly lucrative business for Bedouins and for Egyptian, Sudanese and Eritrean officials who take bribes to facilitate the trade, and it is a major source of income for the Eritrean regime. Despite reports and attempts at international intervention, the government claims no one is persecuted in Eritrea and rejected an Amnesty International report as, quote, wild accusations, unquote, and, quote, totally unsubstantiated, unquote. Voice of the Martyrs says on its website that a religious liberty report indicated that Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki wants to restrict the right to assembly. He fears religious freedom because it may lead to evangelism by Christians, which he believes in turn will lead to social tensions that will assist outside groups in destabilizing the nation. From Open Doors webpage, we learn that Eritrea has a population of 6.7 million. There are approximately 2.5 million people who identify as Christians, the main religions being Christianity and Islam. The government is a one-party state, and the main engines of persecution are dictatorial paranoia, Islamic extremism, and ecclesiastical arrogance. We read that, quote, in recent years there has been increasing pressure on Christians in Eritrea, in particular for non-traditional Protestant Christian communities. Eritrea has been suffering under the authoritarian regime of Isaias Afwerki, which has been geared towards exercising extensive influence over the life of its citizens for more than 2 decades. Islamic extremism is also rising, and the rule of the regime is creating favourable conditions for that. The government intensified its crackdown on Christians, leading to more than 138 arrests of believers and church leaders without due process of law.
All heavy laden, acquainted with sorrow, may Christ in our narrow carry us home. From alabaster come blessings of laughter, fragrance of passion, joy from the truth. Grant the unbroken, tears ever flowing from hearts of contrition, only for you. May sin never hold true, that love never broke through. For God's mercy holds us, and we are His own. This road that we travel, may it be the straight and narrow. God give us peace and grace from shelter with fire, our voices we raise still higher. God give us peace and grace from you. All the day through this road that we travel, may it be the straight
Jonah Fisher, former BBC correspondent in Asmara, posted this article titled Religious Persecution in Eritrea in September 2004. We read, "If you are Catholic, Muslim, or a member of the Orthodox and Evangelical churches in Eritrea, then it seems you can breathe easy. However, those who believe and practice minority faiths are routinely persecuted, according to human rights groups. 2 years ago, the Eritrean government introduced a registration system for religions which forced groups to submit information about themselves in order to be allowed to worship. Apart from the aforementioned, other faiths have not been recognised, and human rights groups have regularly complained that people practicing minority religions have faced harassment. I went to visit a small part of a Christian Pentecostal church that has been banned from meeting for the past 2 years. When I arrived in a small dark room of a private house, 12 men and women faced away from each other, looking to the corners of the room. Lit by just a small lamp, some of them are singing, some praying. Occasionally one breaks into prayer and collapses to the floor. The congregation has divided into small groups. There are 10 other gatherings just like this taking place across Asmara tonight. These people are very trusting of each other, just by being here and praying together. There have been numerous occasions reported around Eritrea of neighbours and friends of worshippers informing the authorities. A few days later, I arranged to meet a man who I will call Samuel. Samuel was attending a religious service just like the one I was at when soldiers arrived. I was praying with 6 people at a house one evening, and the soldiers came into the house, watched us for 1 minute and said, "These meetings are forbidden," he told me. We were beaten with sticks and then taken to a police station. Samuel told me that he and the other Pentecostals had spent the next 3 months being moved between different locations where they were regularly beaten. We were put into a metal shipping container with 9 Jehovah's Witnesses. One of them was in his 90s. During the day it was very hot, and at night very cold. Eventually Samuel said he was released after signing a document in which he promised to return to Orthodox Christianity. His case, it seems, is not an isolated one. I spoke to one American journalist while she was in Eritrea undercover researching religious persecution. She asked that I not mention her name so that she can return to the country. She told me she repeatedly heard from individuals telling her police had taken them off and beaten them after interrupting them praying at home with friends. They were then told they were an enemy of the people and forced to either sign a paper or kept in jail if they wouldn't sign and left in containers. All of these things are just happening repeatedly over and over from people of all different Christian denominations and the Jehovah's Witnesses. So it is very pervasive of any group that are not part of the 4 major religions, she said. The evidence she has seen herself is undeniable. I've seen the scars on people's legs, I've seen their tears, and it's very real, and they live under a lot of fear. I was asked to leave Eritrea before I could get a government response to my research and experiences, but a statement from the Foreign Ministry rejected accusations of religious persecution from the United States. The government seems to have decided that anyone who does not follow a certain standard is an enemy of the people, is an enemy of the state. It is afraid that people who consider their highest allegiance to be God at some point may not be patriotic and follow the state's instructions. At a time of growing tension both with Ethiopia and Sudan, it seems the Eritrean government is determined that nothing, not even religion, should fall outside their control.
You are my peace in the storm.
again. Oh, you have spoken, and you are my peace in the storm.
And you are my peace in the storm. And you are my peace in the storm. Let your peace like a river flow. Come and shelter my faith from all harm. When I cry out, you will answer my call. For you are my peace in the storm. And 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 you are my peace in the storm. Katonda waffe, Katonda waffe, Katonda tuwe mirembe. Katonda waffe, Katonda waffe, Katonda tuwe mirembe. Katonda waffe, Katonda waffe, Katonda tuwe mirembe.
Reading from the Amnesty International report entitled 20 Years of Independence but Still No Freedom, published in 2013. On 24th of May 1993, the state of Eritrea was formally recognised as an independent nation. A UN-supervised referendum had confirmed the country's separation from Ethiopia, against which Eritrea had fought a 30-year war of liberation. 20 years on from the euphoric celebrations and promise of independence, thousands of prisoners of conscience and political prisoners are held in arbitrary detention in Eritrea's prisons without charge or trial for exercising their right to freedom of opinion and expression, or of thought, conscience or religion or belief, or for attempting to flee the repression in their country. In Eritrea, 20 years after independence, there is no freedom of expression, no independent media and no civil society. Only 4 religions are recognised by the state. Only one political party, the ruling People's Front for Democracy and Justice, is permitted. National service conscription is mandatory for all adults and is frequently extended indefinitely. Human rights are systematically violated. Any attempt to dissent in any way from this repressive system is met with arbitrary arrest and detention without trial. Throughout the 20 years of Eritrea's independence, the government of President Isaias Afwerki has systematically used arbitrary arrest and detention without trial to crush all opposition, to silence all dissent, and to punish anyone who refuses to comply with the restrictions placed on freedom of religion and belief, the system of indefinite conscription into national service, and other restrictions on human rights imposed by the government. Thousands of prisoners of conscience and political prisoners have disappeared into secret detention, held incommunicado with no contact with the outside world and without charge or trial. In hundreds of cases, that detention is indefinite. In many hundreds of cases, the families of the prisoners are not informed of arrests or of the whereabouts of their relatives, have never heard from them after their arrest, and do not know if their relatives are alive or dead. Some relatives and detainees have been arrested and detained themselves for asking questions about their family members. Large numbers of people have been arbitrarily detained without charge for over a decade, and many for nearly 20 years, the entirety of Eritrea's independent history. In a very large proportion of these cases, their detention amounts to enforced disappearance. The authorities refuse to acknowledge their detention or conceal their fate or whereabouts, placing them outside the protection of the law. Those in detention include actual or suspected critics or opponents of the government, politicians, journalists, members of unregistered religious groups, as well as those which are registered, people caught trying to evade or desert indefinite national service conscription, or caught trying to flee the country. Many of the architects of Eritrea's independence languish in isolation cells and shipping containers, alongside thousands of other prisoners of conscience and political prisoners, for trying to exercise their rights. Amnesty International believes that the vast majority of the thousands of political prisoners in Eritrea are prisoners of conscience who should be immediately and unconditionally released. With no known exceptions, none of these political prisoners or prisoners of conscience have ever been charged or tried, given access to a lawyer, or been brought before a judge or a judicial officer to assess the legality and necessity of the detention. There is no independent judiciary in Eritrea, and there are no avenues for individuals or their families to legally challenge this system of arbitrary detention. These rights are also laid out in Eritrea's constitution, which was ratified by the National Assembly in 1997, but has never been implemented. According to the testimonies of former detainees received by Amnesty International, torture and other ill treatment are commonplace, used for the purpose of punishment, for interrogation, and for coercion. Detainees are frequently held in underground cells or in metal shipping containers, often in desert locations and therefore subject to extremes of heat and cold. Food, water, and sanitation are scarce. This report highlights 20 years of widespread arbitrary arrest and detention without trial used against anyone in Eritrea who demonstrates dissent in any form. Amnesty International urges President Isaias Afwerki to release all prisoners of conscience detained for the peaceful exercise of their rights to freedom of expression, opinion, association or thought, conscience or religion or belief. To release all other prisoners if they are not to be promptly charged with a recognisable criminal offence and given a fair trial within a reasonable time. To immediately confirm the whereabouts and health status of all prisoners. To end the use of torture and other ill treatment. And to provide all detainees with immediate access to medical care.
Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more weeping, no more weeping, no more weeping over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. There will be singing, there will be singing, there will be singing over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And go home to my Lord and be free.
I've been thinking heaps lately about the word passion. It's probably one of the most used words in our Christian vocabulary, and probably one of the most misused words too. What I didn't realise was that the word passion, it actually finds its origin in the Latin word for suffering, which I guess means that passion is not so much about something you love, but maybe more accurately, your willingness to suffer for something you love. But what does that mean for you and I? Well, what does it look like to be genuinely passionate for God? It actually reminds me of one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard from the persecuted church, of a Christ-centered passion, about this guy called Peter from North Africa. He was arrested when police stormed into the secret Christian gathering that he was attending. He was caught and held for 6 years without charge in some of the most horrific conditions I've ever heard of. On one occasion, Peter was locked in a cell so narrow that he could only lie down, essentially a coffin, for 5 months. They took him straight from this coffin and placed him in an underground cell, completely dark, and they left him there for a further 6 months. When they finally pulled him out of this hole, he said not only was he almost completely blind, but his legs were paralysed. And over the coming months, by the grace of God, he says, my sight returned and my legs were healed. The police would regularly pull him in and say, Peter, we want you to sign this piece of paper, which literally said, I will not speak about Jesus. I will not meet with Christians. And on each occasion, he would refuse to sign it. One day, Peter and 2 fellow Christian inmates resolved to escape. With no shoes and just the clothes on their backs, under a hail of gunfire, they ran for their lives. In fact, Peter didn't stop walking for more than 200 kilometres until he reached the relative safety of a refugee camp. And as he spoke about the last 6 years of his life, he said he realised that not only had he lost his freedom, but he lost time. He said, I'm almost 40 years old, I'm not trained, I'm not educated. I may never get married or have a family of my own. But then he stopped and smiled and he said, but I still have Jesus, and he's worth it all. It dawned on me recently that, well, I live as though Jesus Christ isn't coming back in my lifetime. And the impact that has on my faith, on my passion, it's crazy. Because if I'm honest with you, I've been living that style of faith for more than 30 years. Whereas the people I've met right across North Africa and people like Peter, they live as though Jesus Christ is coming back in their lifetime, with a willingness to suffer for God. It's almost as though in the middle of the valley of the shadow of death, they find the river of life, the one true God, Jesus, who before you were passionate for him, suffered because of his passion for you. If you knew Jesus were coming back in 10 days, what would change in your life? Because whether he is or isn't coming back in our lifetime, it shouldn't change a thing.
I'd like to introduce you now to Helen Mottee, an Eritrean believer, singer and songwriter who was imprisoned in a shipping container for over 2 years for her faith in Jesus. Reading from her book, Song of the Nightingale. A single candle flickers, its flame barely illuminating the darkness. They never burn for more than 2 hours after the container door is locked. There is not enough oxygen to keep the flame alive any longer. It will go out soon. The woman behind me shifts in her sleep and her knees dig painfully into my back. I try to wiggle over to give her some room, but I'm already pressed up against another sleeping body. I pull my blanket up higher and curl up as much as I can. Despite the proximity of so many people, it is freezing cold. Condensation drips from the roof and slides down my cheek, and when it moistens my lips, I taste rust. The air is thick with a dirty, metallic tang. The ever-present stench of the bucket in the corner and the smell of close-pressed, unwashed bodies. I peer around, trying to work out where she is, the woman whose mind is gone. There is a dark shape standing by the small window, hacked roughly into the side of the container. I stiffen. Sometimes she blocks the opening by stuffing her blanket into it, cutting off our limited supply of fresh air. Other nights she shouts and wails, rocking the container so that none of us can sleep. She is worse now there are more of us. 19 in a space that can only sleep 18. Tonight she is quiet, and it makes me uneasy. But I am so tired, and so I force my body to relax against the hard floor. Abruptly the candle snuffs out. I close my eyes and I think of my daughter. Please, Lord, keep her safe. The floor creaks. Someone must be getting up and stumbling across the sleepers to the toilet bucket. I try to shut the noise out. Suddenly, without warning, hands close on my neck like a vice. My eyes fly open, but it is too dark to see. Then there is a guttural snarl, and I know that it is her, the mad woman, her fingers tight on my throat. I push myself up, but I have no breath to scream, and I am not strong enough to shake her off. So I do the only thing I can do. I bang my free hand on the wall of the container and kick out. All around us, prisoners are waking up. One tries to pull her away from me, but now she has one hand on my throat and the other knotted in my hair, yanking it away from my scalp. I gulp down a breath and manage to scream. The other prisoners start to shout too and bang the sides of the container. There are shouts now coming from outside and the sound of hurrying feet, the screech of the bolts sliding back, and the pop as air rushes into the container, and then the doors are flung wide open. My eyes burn as torchlight sears across my face, and then a guard is yanking her away from me and beating her about the head and body with his baton. I fall onto all fours, gasping in air. The guards pull her out of the container and slam the door again. The other women rush to crawl around the tiny window, so small that only one can see out. One does and whispers, "They are beating her." Her voice is low so as not to anger the guards, who do not like us to look out. She risks another glance. They have tied her outside. The others start to lie down again, looking forward to a few hours of sleep before the guards come again to march us to the toilet field. I lie down too, but my scalp feels as though it is on fire, and I know that I will not sleep tonight. Sometimes I cannot believe that this is my life. These 4 metal walls, all of us corralled like cattle, the pain, the hunger, the fear, all because of my belief in a God who is risen, who charges me to share my faith with those who do not yet know him, a God who I am forbidden to worship. I think back to a question I have been asked many times over my months in prison. Is your faith worth this, Helen? And as I take a deep breath of the sour air, as my scalp stings, the mad woman rants outside and the guards continue on their rounds. I whisper the answer, yes. Following is a BBC interview with Helen shortly after she was released and received political asylum in Denmark.
Helen Bahani has just been granted political asylum in Denmark, and she spoke to us through a translator.
It is very difficult for me to even recall. It sort of fills me with grief, and it's the most difficult thing that anybody could imagine. I was beaten up from almost the day that I entered prison until the day I left prison. I was beaten up severely. There were times when I was deprived food, and other things also happened to me there.
You were kept, weren't you, in a shipping container for 2 years. What was that like?
I was in a container for 30 months of that time. There were times when I was in different types of cells, underground cells. The containers are very difficult to live in. There isn't enough light, there isn't enough air even, and during the day it gets unbearably hot, and in the nights it's extremely cold, and on top of that you've got your injuries as well.
And all the time, you already said they kept on beating you. What were they trying to get you to do or to say?
They were asking me to leave my faith.
And did it ever cross your mind that you should do that?
No, it has never occurred to me, because I am prepared to die for my faith.
So how did you eventually manage to get out?
I think it's to do with the medical conditions that I sustained. I've now got kidney problems as a result of the beatings I received. My legs don't work properly, and God only knows what will happen to me in the end, whether I will walk unaided or not.
Just a few days ago, you were granted political asylum in Denmark. Are you going to stay indefinitely? Is that your plan?
Yes, I've come across a country, a nation that has accepted me, and so I would like to live here. I would like to recover, and also I'd like to be able to worship God here, because I can do it freely now.
My husband has been in prison in Eritrea for the last year and a half. The government arrested him because he was preaching the gospel. I would like all Christians to pray that my husband is released. I need my husband, and our 3 children need their father. I feel sad, and I feel very sorry about the way things are happening in Eritrea, especially the way the government is persecuting Christians. It is a very personal thing for me, because this has affected my life. But I also feel the pain of those who are being persecuted and those who are imprisoned.
Really, we have a great burden, and we feel very sad for our friends and family who are suffering inside Eritrea.
Yeah, I pray for my country.
I pray for my country. I love it. I love my people. I pray for it always. I pray that God will give us freedom for our beliefs.
I ask you to pray that the persecution may stop, because this persecution is from the evil one. We know that the gospel will spread, even though there is persecution and opposition, but people are suffering, and I ask Christians to pray so that the suffering may cease.
The pastor we were asked to pray for in this report is Tesfatsion Hagoth, who ministered in the same church as Helen Mottee. He was arrested in May 2004 and spent 6 years in prison because he would not deny Christ. Unlike so many other believers, this man survived. Reading from the Bible Society webpage. While many of his contemporaries remained in prison, Pastor Tesfatsion was finally released in 2010, but continued living under house arrest in Eritrea. Within a year he had been smuggled out of the country by Christian supporters, where Open Doors was able to help him with accommodation and medical costs. Meanwhile, Sephora, his wife, had been sponsored and granted a visa to move with her daughters to Australia, and upon his release she swiftly began the application process for her husband. Despite the difficulties of resettling in a new country far away from their African home, Sephora and the girls continued to lean on the Lord, becoming involved in the local Ethiopian community and making their first precious contact with Pastor Tesfatsion after more than a decade apart via Skype. On 18th of January 2012, Pastor Tesfatsion Hagos finally arrived in Perth to begin a new life in Australia. For the first time since May 1998, he was reunited with his family as a whole, wife Sephora and the 3 young women he'd left behind as little girls. 3 months had turned into almost 14 years, but throughout it all the pastor and his wife had learnt and remembered one very important thing. That God is faithful, says Sephora. I learnt God is faithful. I saw my God in every one of my steps. I saw him help my kids grow up. It's so hard when you are alone, but I saw God as the Father in my house. He kept my girls so disciplined, so everything. I saw my God's hand help me. I saw my God encourage me, have patience with me. Sometimes when my heart dropped, I'd get down and he encouraged me. I see my God's faithfulness. I thank God for everything I see in my life like this. In Eritrea, Pastor Tesfatsion's church has long since closed, and believers have joined the many evangelical Christians worshipping underground. Please remember our sisters and brothers in Eritrea, those who worship secretly and those who are suffering imprisonment and torture. Pray for all prisoners of conscience in this country that has been referred to as the North Korea of Africa. This is Helen Mottee for Eternity.
For Eternity is produced in the studios of Rima FM Port Macquarie.